Now, I keep on hearing this particular phrase, building generational wealth. When I say this to you, what does come to your mind?
Starting from nothing and building to something. Parents, I think, for the first time will, when they pass on assets, which wasn't the case for their parents before them, is something that I guess has an impact on the next generation. Then, of course, there's a compounding effect over time.
You were telling me you started your professional journey as a lawyer, and then you went into property space.
Independence and making your own way was always very important. I was always dreaming, I guess, and thinking about building my own wealth, issue, rule, application, conclusion. And it's a very similar way of thinking that you bring to property, particularly property development.
So if a person is starting a journey, let's say our audience, is starting their property journey, they're looking at the residential or they're looking at commercial. Is there a particular pathway in your mind which a person should take?
A clear first step is how much money do you have available to invest? And that really determines your next step. Commercial property, typically speaking, or generally speaking, is more rewarding in terms of the cash and the returns generated.
What is the difference between an industrial, retail, and an office commercial property?
So to that end, retail, medical, commercial, it's all the same.
From your experience, what type of opportunities they should be looking at? And part B of the question is, what are the typical mistakes a first-time investors make? Like what are the typical fears or misconceptions people have about investing in a property fund? Hi everyone, welcome to Aman Punya podcast. I'm your host Aman. So today we are sitting down with Ben from Gion Properties. He's the owner and director of Gion, and we spoke about commercial property. We spoke about building generational wealth, teaching the value of money to kids, talking about the commercial property itself, first-time investors, how to invest in syndicates, how to invest in property funds, and how to build passive income. And lastly, we talk about the future of AI and market trends in Australia. It was a very good conversation, especially because we hear a lot about residential property, but not too many speakers that talk about commercial. So it was a very smooth, relaxed conversation about commercial property. So you learn more about this space, and I hope it adds value in your life. So if you're a first-time investor who's looking to enter commercial property, this is the podcast for you, and I'm sure you will learn a lot of lessons from it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It really motivates us. And if you want to see similar content, please help us out. So sit back, relax, enjoy this conversation. Thank you.
Think dentist? Think Dentiglow.
Today I have a very special guest with me who's an expert in the commercial property. His journey started being a lawyer, and then he transitioned into property development, particularly in commercial. So today we have Ben from Gion, and we're going to be talking to him about his journey, about his learnings, and about his experience. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Aman. It's great to be here.
Now, it's a pleasure to meet you again. Last time we spoke to each other, there were so many experiences, there were so many lessons, there were so many teachings you were telling me, and I was very impressed. So I thought, why don't I sit down with you and have a detailed conversation? So today, finally, the day has arrived.
We found the time. It's great.
So for the audience who don't know you, Ben, why don't you give a quick overview who you are and give a bit of backstory about you?
Yeah, Ben Griffin. I'm a dad, boss, and husband of my three roles in life, and I just go from one to the next. So married to Maria Gomez, now Maria Griffin, Central American. We've had 5 children who range in ages from 14 to 26. And I'm the director of Gion, and we're a property developer, a commercial property manager, a funds manager, and a build-to-rent manager based on the north side of Brisbane.
Wow. First of all, I don't believe that you have a kid who's age 26 because you look 30 yourself.
Sorry. No, I turned 50 this year, but no, very proud. Alejandro is our eldest, and he's in the works at Gion. And in fact, I've just finished a meeting with him to come here.
Now, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Ben, you were telling me you started your professional journey as a lawyer, and then you went into property space. So tell me, what made you go from being a lawyer to property, and what was that catalyst moment, or what happened? How did you end up in property?
I'm not quite sure actually, because actually I always wanted to be a pilot. So growing up, I had pictures of FA-18s all over my walls of my room, and it wasn't until grade 12 when I went to see the career counsellor with my father that I came out, and he said, "Look, it's actually a fairly lonely life being a pilot, and you're not very good at doing lonely. Maybe you want to think about the law." And I've always been a good boy. I'd thought hard about that advice and immediately changed tack to the law, and just got into Queensland University of Technology at the time, straight law degree. Had a lot of fun, made some really good friends, lifelong friends there. And then that put me out into my articles of clerkship. So back then in Queensland, you had to spend 2 years training as a solicitor before you could be admitted. And I was always very clear that I wanted to get admitted so that when I went overseas, which was always the plan, that I could go there and live there earning so that I wasn't living as a pauper, and I could then, fund travel, which I did for about 5 years living in the UK.
Okay.
And it wasn't until I got back to Australia that I worked a little bit as a lawyer, and then I transitioned into property.
But can you tell me why it must be a big change? You spent so many years, studying law, and then you were practicing in UK, then back in Australia. But what was that moment that you thought, this is not my space. I want to transition into the new space, which is all, different industry altogether. Why did you want to go to a different space, start the journey again? What was that moment? What was the reasoning behind it?
Yes. I might answer that question two ways. I think, firstly, there was definitely something innate that was in my subconscious from very early on, which was that I was looking to get ahead in life. I come from a farming background originally, and certainly my father's family do. And so independence and making your own way was always very important, an important part of growing up. So I was always dreaming, I guess, and thinking about building my own wealth. And so that was there as an itch, but that was always going to happen after formal qualifications. And I'm now, as a father, recommending different degrees to my children as they matriculate from school. And the law degree has been a fantastic set of tools. What I like to say is that being a lawyer and a developer is the same in the sense that it's bringing structure to chaos. So that's my little tagline. And that certainly works in development. So in the law, for example, you get taught issue, rule, application, conclusion. And it's a very similar way of thinking that you bring to property, particularly property development, where usually it's a mess. You've got to look carefully to see the opportunity and then pick up and bring that structure to a situation where you can see a finished form. So look, there was always a little itch, and that sort of grew, became a voice. And it was at the end of my first year back here, after I'd arrived back from the UK, where I realised that even though I was actually doing quite well in the law, it really wasn't for me. So I went into the lift. I remember it. I was working at Tyne & McCartney, which is, I think, Queensland's oldest law firm. And I had a good career progression out in front of me, and a very good firm, very good people. And it just wasn't right. Something was amiss. And so I hit the lift, went down. Back then it was a public telephone box. I called my father and I called my wife, and I said, I think that's it. And so together we hatched a plan. I remember I bought a car, a mobile phone, and went and rented some office space. I kept working in the law, moonlighting. So I'd already been looking at property development while cash flow was coming from the law, and I kept that cash flow going, which is the first thing I'd tell any of your listeners, cash is king, particularly if you're raising a young family. And so that was very important. And the law continued to provide income for 2 or 3 years as I got on my feet.
Okay, now that makes sense to me. Now, I keep on hearing this particular phrase, building generational wealth. When I say this to you, what does come to your mind?
A few things. Maybe if I respond on a macro and a micro basis. So from a macro basis, it's something that's always fascinated me, and I guess this is a little bit my time overseas. I got to spend time in across that 5 years making friends and often being invited into homes, and sometimes living for short periods in the homes of people in Belgium, in France, Switzerland and Italy. And what I got a good glimpse of there was how different Australia is. The difference between old world and new world, and how it impacts and how we live. Very much, I'm the son of a baby boomer, and that was for my father's. From when he was young, it was always about developing wealth and being able to stand on his own 2 feet, because his father had done that coming out of the depression here, starting from nothing and building to something. And so the concept of intergenerational wealth for me, as I understood it before I went overseas, was just you start with nothing and you build something. And that was the sort of entrepreneurial itch, I guess, I was talking about earlier. But when I was overseas, I got to see that intergenerational wealth there is understood differently, because for many of the families I lived with, they were born with means and with a family history and assets and wealth in a town or a city. Yeah. And they knew that they would die passing that on to their children. And so there's a very, very different sense of time and intergenerational wealth, and a very different sense of how you'd even raise your children there, with a sense of responsibility for others sort of kicking in right from the start of your journey, and a lot less aggressive in trying to build your own wealth. So I think that's as I've understood it and been fascinated by the subject from what I call a macro perspective, because it is very much a dynamic that defines how we are as Australians. Mm-hmm. From a micro perspective, I guess I'm living that myself, where it's very much intertwined with values. My parents, I think for the first time will, when they pass on, hopefully that's many, many years away, but when they do, they'll do that leaving assets, which wasn't the case for their parents before them. Yeah. And so that is something that I guess has an impact on the next generation. Then, of course, there's a compounding effect over time. I have to start thinking about that for my children as well. And whether, for example, as our children purchase houses and when they get into the housing market, do we play a different role than what our parents did? And how do we ensure that our children maintain the same set of values and carry that forward in a world where they'll definitely have more maybe than we did, and certainly than our parents did?
I think you raised a few questions in my mind, because that, you had a different perspective, being an Australian and being, baby boomer son and whatnot. And I can relate to that, because when I came to Australia, I came with nothing. But if I go back to India, we already have a house, we were like upper middle class, we had good means, and we had to start from scratch here. And I keep on telling my kids, you got a good start, you got a jump start. But if I was back in India, I already had that start, and it can lead to more opportunities, because you already have an established network, you already have the means, and you can take it further. And I was listening to this video on social media, and they were talking about, imagine if you're in a race and starting point is different. Someone is starting from the baseline, someone is 100 meter ahead, and someone is 2 meter ahead, and that's where they're starting from. And some people in the audience, they said that's unfair. You all have to be at the same starting baseline. But in reality, in life, that's how it is. If you're ahead because you already have the support, you already had the means, then you have a jump start in life, and that's what it means. And that comes through generational wealth. So it's quite an interesting observation.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the first thing that we educate our children at home, and this is a repeated theme, is we're here to raise you in the world that is, not in the world as it should be. and to that end, you're spot on. The world is essentially unfair.
Yeah.
I think the key is just knowing where you're starting the race, because what I find and what fascinates me about immigrant culture, and I've said maybe controversially to my children that I discriminate at work. And I do that in the sense that if I have two people that I'm interviewing for a position and they are even in terms of all of the assessments, I have to make a line ball call.
Yeah.
I'll select the immigrant every day of the week because I know that they're bringing something else, because they've had to take themselves from the race where maybe they were starting 20 metres in front, and they have to put themselves in a new race, and they've been able to do that and succeed, where they know they've got to make another 20 metres up on someone before the finish line to succeed. And so the key, I think, is not to get caught when you're in the wrong race and you don't know it, because if you're an immigrant, you know, and you've got honed skills. My wife's family is an immigrant family from Central America. And you can see in their short family history in Australia that they've attacked all aspects of life aggressively because they've had to, and they've been successful, and that's a great thing.
No, as they say, we all have a chip on the shoulder, so we have to perform and take the direction forward. But coming back to now property, so how can we use property to create, say, passive income and financial independence, which can ultimately lead to generation wealth?
Yeah, well, look, that's really the core of our business. And maybe if I give you a practical example, because it's the practical examples I like the most. I'm a breadwinner in a single income household, so I've got 7 dependents plus a dog that eats too much. And so the way I view commercial property is that it's like me having another breadwinner in the house. So you have to expend some savings, some capital, in order to acquire a commercial property or to develop a commercial property. And once it's complete, typically if you financed it, then you've got debt to pay. But if the development's been successful, then you'll have a loan to value ratio where your interest payments are taken care of with the income, and then you've got surplus, and that surplus is applied to your non-recoverable outgoings, and then as income effectively to either pay down debt or to feed into the family, which means I don't have to work quite as hard. That bit hasn't quite worked for me yet, but yeah.
Now, there are so many questions, with that one statement. Okay, let me put it a different way. So if a person is starting a journey, let's say our audience, is starting their property journey, they're looking at the residential or they're looking at commercial. Is there a particular pathway in your mind which a person should take? For example, I firmly believe everyone should, buy their first home, use the grant which is given by the government and make use of the stamp duty. But let's say they've done that. And after that, should they go and buy an investment property in the residential market, or they should go into commercial property and they should buy and build that commercial property portfolio, given the fact commercial property is always cash flow better and it can sustain itself? So should a person should they keep going on that road to accumulate more commercial property, or they should have a balance, buy 2 residential property, use equity from that and buy 1 commercial? Or is there some sort of formula equation in your mind with all the experiences you have you would like to share with us?
If you thought you had lots of questions, then that question leads to many, many, many answers, exponential number of answers. So if I could say some things that I think hold true, first is to trust in your instincts, okay? And the first thing that one of your listeners might think is, well, I don't have any instincts for property. But I think common sense is the instinct that we all have. And so that's the first thing I would say. Secondly, if the devil's always in the detail. So any answer I would give you is always premised on what's the detail. So commercial property, typically speaking, or generally speaking, is more rewarding in terms of the cash and the returns generated. But of course, that depends on what price you strike. Okay. So for your listeners, maybe the first step is always to understand what capital do you have available, okay, that you don't need for other things and that you're not going to need to call on, because that goes to the liquidity, your liquidity. So it's pointless investing, $20,000 of your savings if you've got private school fees coming up and you know you need it back. So how much, a clear first step is how much money do you have available to invest? And that really determines your next step. And so the more that you have, okay, the more flexibility that it gives you. The less you have, then you maybe need to pair with others if you're wanting to enter the commercial property scene. So that's a second dynamic, I guess. So trust your common sense and your instincts. Secondly, look to how much you have available.
Yeah.
And then I think if you do have your own home, then you've got a great starting point. If you've got a mortgage on a house or an apartment, then you'll know what interest rate you're paying at the moment. Say you might be paying somewhere between 5 and 6%. And so whatever decision that you're going to make outside of putting money in your home, okay, in Queensland, in Australia, for example, you know that you need to make a minimum 6% return off the investment, minimum, unless there's a tax scenario that it assists you with, because every dollar that you earn that you put against the home loan is immediately saving you 6%. Okay. Not just that, but if you end up selling that apartment or house at a later point, then your capital gain, in Queensland at least, is tax-free. Yeah. So and this is the way the system's designed, is for there to be real advantages. So I think that's the next thing, is to really think about and to know you've got a baseline, which is pay off your mortgage, because unless and until you've got a better place. So that means you've got to be making that 6% greater return. And then I think, without sort of getting into too much detail, insofar as commercial property is concerned, if you've got a smaller amount of money, then you need to really invest with others if you want to access opportunities. And we can talk some more about what our practical experience has been. And the more that you have, the more options you'll have.
For the audience, I just want to make sure they totally get this point, because Ben made a very good point. What Ben is saying, if you have a residential property as a principal owner occupied, and you're paying, say, for example, 6% interest on that property, and you're looking to invest somewhere else, and you're going to put money into that, and let's say you're getting 4% return on that property, it's not worthwhile, because you can keep that money in an offset account, or you can pay off your mortgage in your principal home. So you should be making whatever interest rate you're paying or above, so that it's a worthwhile investment making outside. So that's a very good, valid point. And that should be a decision-making criteria when a person is looking at a commercial property, or for that matter, any other property, because that definitely makes sense. Also, I would like to share with the audience, I have gone through this roller coaster myself, that is it better to pay off your resi property or keep on investing your extra cash flow to build up your property portfolio? After 10, 12 years of experience, my own personal experience tells me it's better to pay off your own principal home first. And down the line, if you have an excellent opportunity, you can take the equity out of your property. But at least it really gives you a peace of mind, because the market will go up, market will go down. Life never remains the same. Someone gave me the advice, I never listened to it. But in the hindsight, I understand what advice was given to me, which I'm passing on to you. So if you can, try to pay off your principal home as soon as you can. And then whatever extra cash flow you have, then you go and do other investments. So those were the two golden nuggets which I could share. Then another interesting topic which a lot of people hear and they talk about is how should they buy the property, in terms of should they buy it in their own personal name, or should they create different structures like trust, family trust or unit trust. I know it's a topic more about the lawyers and accountants, but you are a lawyer. But what's your take? Like, is there a secret recipe a person needs to know? Like, what's the benefit or what's the disadvantage of either or?
Look, firstly, I wasn't a property or a tax lawyer, I should say that. And so therefore not in any position really to provide advice. It's definitely idiosyncratic, or it's personal to the different circumstances. So, your listeners should definitely take advice.
Yeah.
It's obviously different jurisdictions have different incentives. In Queensland, individuals are highly incentivized to buy their own house because of that capital gains tax exemption that applies. And that way, and not just encouraged to buy it, but to add value to it, which is why you see a great renovation landscape right across Queensland. That's been the case for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to see towns and cities improved apart from anything else. So, it really is a matter of...
It's an individual situation. Because I think if you're looking for more protection, if that's the main area of concern, then, buying in trust or, family trust or unit trust, I think could be one approach to look at. And as you mentioned, if people are buying in their personal name and later on, they want to go and, sell one and move into other property, and then, they want to renovate it. And down the line, if they want to sell it, they can have capital gains free income.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
all sorts of different permutations. There's definitely no one size fits all there. So
no, definitely. All right.
Yeah.
You said something initially, like, and I want to go a bit, deep into that. You're talking about, like, teaching your kids about, or talking to them about, generational wealth and whatnot. So I want to touch, like, what should we teach our kids about, A, about creating generational wealth, B, creating about a value system, C, about income or property. Can you share, like, if you have your kids, on a weekend and you want to share your mind and your knowledge with them, what do you teach them? How to get ahead in life?
Good question. Very difficult one. So the first thing I'd say about children, and I'm sure this is your listeners' experience as well, is that they're all very, very different and they've all got different aptitudes. And so some of them don't want to have that conversation at all. And of course, timing is the other aspect there. I think the key is, and certainly for my wife and I, you want your children's feet to always be firmly on the ground, and you want them to have a clear sense of value and a sense of obligation. So where you receive and you haven't had to work for something, you need to understand the value of that, and that should create, I think, a sense of obligation, that it's a question of how can you give back.
But the question is how to actually create that value system and that obligation, because when they're starting, the benchmark for them, is on a different level and it's on a different platform. If they're born in a house which is a beautiful house, they have all the fancy cars, and for them that's their, like, natural choice. Like, that's for them, that's the baseline they're starting with, and there's nothing to compare to. So I always struggle with, the question is how to actually deliver that that mindset, like what steps, actual physical steps to take to make it happen.
It's a real challenge, and it's possibly one of the biggest challenges that my wife and I face. Our children have heard lots of stories of hardship. Mostly my wife's escaped civil war, and she's come to another country without the language and has had to genuinely start from scratch. But then we both benefited from private school education, so even she would be the first to say that she got a leg up. And so I think when it comes to our children, then they've had private schools from preschool all the way through, and a house, a roof over their heads, and plenty of food, more food than you can sometimes imagine with the boys. But so how do you do that? Maybe if I just give you a couple of practical examples.
That'd be great.
In some respects, and this is a good thing because we live in a relatively affluent society, and I think the first thing you have to do is just be recognising that as a parent, and making sure that that's present and visible in your house. The schools that our children attend make a real effort to ensure that the students of the schools are plugged in and that they are, for example, working for charities as part of those schools and coming into contact with the homeless and cooking for the homeless, which is something that we do in our house as a way of, on a regular basis, keeping some connection. But it's hard to put that uniform on and be surrounded by people from similar backgrounds and to have it bite. So you're always doing what you can. Maybe a better example is, and I'm happy to share this, so our children don't just get phones and our children don't get pocket money. So they work from as young as they can work, and that's a very important part of they don't pay board, which was something I did, and I'm actually grateful for, but my wife won't stand for that. Our children don't get vehicles. They get the use of a hand-me-down vehicle, but I've actually drafted a one-page rental agreement. So each child signs that. So child number 3 has just got their piece. So we've gone through the process just this last weekend. She's signed the agreement. This was a tougher negotiation, but she's doing a law degree, so I'd expect that. So this is a practical example, but she gets use of the vehicle and she doesn't have to pay the capital cost, but she has to appreciate what the vehicle does cost.
Yeah.
Secondly, she has to pay all fuel, registration, insurance, RACQ, and repairs up to $1,000 repairs, and then puppy pays above that. She has to do 5 trips a week for her mother, so collecting groceries or collecting other children from wherever. Yeah. And she has to keep the car clean. And the moment that one of those things is not satisfied, then I just take the keys. And it's amazing how well the car gets kept and how polite someone can be to their mum when the keys just aren't there if they don't fulfill their end of the agreement. So that's agreement number 3 for me. And I think that's a way of trying to swim against that tide and make sure that your children's feet are as on the ground as they can be.
No, that's a very good example. And that's what I was looking for, those practical examples. And those practical lessons, which we can incorporate in our life. Yeah. Because I see this happening all the time, that people have no real sense of the world. And you're right, Australia is an affluent society, and if you compare to the rest of the world, there are so many different segments within a society, and there's so much to compare to. And
I think travel's another way. They say travel broadens the mind. It does, because it's fleeting. So we did take a trip to El Salvador, and El Salvador doesn't enjoy the same level of wealth or security that we do here in Australia. And so that was an eye-opener for the children. Yeah. But, of course, you come back and then you get back into your routines fairly quickly. Yeah. And so that has an impact. It's helpful, but it's a constant and something that we work on all day, every day. Manual labour and chores. Okay, very, very important. Children need to know and to be pitching in all the time. And we've got many, I'm sure my children will recite for you. But one of the rules that goes back to my father's family is that you're never sitting down if one of your parents is working unless you've been told to or you've got permission. Okay. So, you don't stand while someone's vacuuming around your feet, for example.
Well, Ben, I need to bring you in my house. You need to tell my kids.
Anytime. What does make me smile? You obviously get a lot of resistance over the years, but then as your children, and I'm not yet a grandfather, but it is interesting seeing when they move into their own homes, which has happened with one, and my second as residence at college at university, and she's mum there. She's the SRA, they call it. And so seeing them grumble for 18 years, 20 years, but then take on the very same standards and then starting to talk to others about their standards for their houses, that's a moment where I think you've had a small win.
No, I think you gave us really good practical examples, and thank you for that. I want to ask you one question. You mentioned your first child is 26. So at what age they started their property journey, if you are okay to share with us? Yes. And how did they went into the property market if they have already entered? Can you share that experience or journey with us?
I can. It's an interesting one. Maybe just before I do, I was just thinking...
Sorry to cut you. I want to make caveat because I am making a rough plan in my mind for my
Yeah.
son who's 13 right now.
Yes.
And I'm going to putting him on part-time work so he can learn the value of working hard.
Yes. Yeah.
But I made a rough plan that I want him to
Yeah.
go as soon as he becomes 18. I want him to buy his first residential property, and then a series of things which I'm planning for him, which I want to work with him. So I just want to learn if you have done anything similar, or what's the journey like for you.
Happy to share, Aman. Maybe just before I do, I'm just jumping back to what we were just talking about. Something that I think is really important when you're trying to keep those values is to talk to other parents with similar values.
Yeah.
So we come into contact with lots of parents with children of similar ages. Usually if we're, working on a school barbecue or, cleaning up after a swimming carnival. So my wife and I try and choose parents that we think have got similar values to ours and chat because those parents are usually working out exactly the same things that we have been. And it gives you confidence because you share. It might be the car hire agreement.
Yeah.
Some parents are aghast, how could you do that? And other parents are like, spot on, buddy. That's what I'm going to take that. Can I have a copy?
Yeah.
And of course you share it and then you've got the confidence. And then the beautiful thing that you can bring into your house is to say, oh, these aren't my rules. Everybody else is doing this. So that helps you to win some of those arguments. Look, to come back to, you've actually asked a question that touches on something we were talking about earlier, which is intergenerational wealth.
Yeah.
So no secret here in Brisbane, and it afflicts all of Australia, house prices are soaring.
Yeah.
So I'll say the expectation, which sort of became a dream growing up, which was that at some point in time that you would own your own home, that's certainly shifted. So the differential, the delta between someone's income and the price of a median house, that's grown significantly.
Yeah.
Just as a direct factual account, I could have entered the housing market before I went overseas. So this is in the 90s in Brisbane, with a combined salary. If my wife's salary at the time, we didn't know each other, but at that time would have been $160,000, $170,000. I'm just talking in terms of numbers because it's relevant.
Yeah.
And back then, you could purchase an apartment for $350,000 in one of our developments. Excuse me. Our son and his partner might be on very similar salary now in real dollar terms, not adjusted. And the value of that same apartment will be 5 to 7 times more expensive, the same apartment. And now it's not a new apartment. So it's quite significant and quite extraordinary the change that's occurred. Salaries haven't shifted anything like what the value of homes and apartments have. So if you take that and then the intergenerational wealth issue that we were talking about before, where in Australia we're definitely seeing wealth starting to pass on through generations now, where that wasn't the case, people starting from scratch, then it's something that we've talked about. And I'll just tell you, I don't mind sharing, it's not confidential. My wife and I made a conscious decision that we would contribute, tell you the amount, $10,000 to each child when they were going in to make a house acquisition or they're buying real property, when they're entering the market. So some would say, well, that's not really going to make much of a difference. And others might say, well, you're distorting their values because you're giving them a leg up. So that conversation was one we had. We agonized. Should it be more? Should it be less? If the other children know then that is something that is going to come their way, well, does that mean that in that race you talked about, they're seeing themselves, further down the track? So that'll make them less hungry and that'll dull their, their desire to build their own wealth. These are all the things on our walks around the neighbourhood that my wife and I were discussing. And so, we landed on that number. And to cut to the specifics then, my son wanted to get into the market. This is 3 years ago. He wanted to buy a 2-bath, 2-bed apartment. He didn't have a 6-figure salary, so he went to the bank, got a maximum possible loan, had to work some more months to be able to build the right profile.
Yeah.
In Queensland, he had the benefit of a first homeowners grant, which is very helpful. He had the benefit of the amount that he was going to get from his parents. He had his savings.
Mm-hmm.
And so that wasn't a whole heap, but it gave him a budget to work to. And then he started to hunt in the market to try to find, an apartment. And at the end of the day, it actually required all of that and a little bit of vendor finance for him to be able to just get across the line on I think it was $510,000 for an apartment. He observed all the fundamentals. So it was out of the flood zone. It was close to rail. It was close to retail. It was, 3 stops from the city. So he observed all those property fundamentals. And he tells me that the apartment next door, which is identical, just sold for $750,000. So in a 2 to 3 year time period, he's made a $200,000 plus, or in percentage terms, 25 to 30% plus uplift in capital. So that's a great story, but it's one that has many, many parts, and all those things had to work together for him to be able to enter the property market. And that's not been the case with his friends who are mostly renting.
And I think that would create a big difference down the line. And to answer, when you were saying that, should you help your kids or not, to give them a jump start in the race ahead, I think as parents, if we're not going to help them, who else is going to help them? So I think it's a moral obligation on our part that we should be helping them, but also holding their hand and giving them the right education, the right tools, and whatever financial help which we can. If I tell you my own thought process.
Just before you do, because you might colour my... I'd disagree with you a little bit there, just to be a bit controversial. So if one of my children said to me, if you're not going to help me, then who will? My response to them would be, you need to help yourself first and always, because there's a time when I'm not going to be here, and there's a time where there may not be any family here. So first and foremost, for you and for your future family, whether it's me talking to one of my boys or the girls, the question is, first and always, it's you, and you need to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. I think that's fundamental, that way of thinking. And then anything else that then happens that helps you, well, that's a leg up, and something you should be grateful for. Yep. But you should never put yourself in a position where you have to count on that, I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah.
No, I understand where you're coming from, but the way I am processing it is that you don't feed in their mind that, okay, don't worry, daddy has got your back. What I'm saying is that you need to teach them the lessons, you give them the right value, you tell them the how to operate and what needs to be done. But when the time comes to give them a jump start, we should help them. I mean, at least that's my point of view or my way of thinking. But keep their mindset on the right track and get them to learn early on. Like, how I was telling you, like my son is 13 right now, he's going to be 14 soon. So my plan is I've told them, you have to buy your first property when you're going to turn 18. You need a deposit of $50,000. So you have 4 years to save that. And so we have worked out a plan backwards where how much he needs to earn and what he needs to do and what they can do, picking a part-time job or some sort of small business as a kid, they can run. So give them all the teachings, all the lessons they can learn. They have 4 years to learn. And whatever I can do to help them to secure the first property at age of 18, because property is a time game, is a numbers game. And it's a big advantage of having leverage, which you can use through banks. So if they start early, my belief is that they'll be far ahead, compared to their peers, who are going to be the same age bracket.
Absolutely, man. Children absorb enough of the news to understand that there's a housing crisis. They hear about it. And now in my family, that big brother has entered that market, and he's quite happy with the decisions he's made and the risk he's taking on. That's been helpful to me because I've got now 4 of the siblings who are thinking, okay, well, what does that mean for me? And you're right, having a plan starting young. So I've been approached to have those conversations. I'm less prescriptive maybe than you are. So I like the approach to come from Christina, and is the most recent. So she's got a job working the delicatessen. Her brother stacks fruit out the back, and he's maybe less focused on the numbers right now. But she certainly got an understanding that now is a good time to start planning. and just what it means to save over time and to have a plan, and how that can put you in the right place in the right time if you're planning early enough. So we've started that conversation. The mission will be harder for her than it was for her older brother, because of that rapid increase in pricing. But no, she'll find a way, and I'll be there to help her. That's how I like to view it, rather than trying to set it up for them. The energy, the drive, the ambition, it has to come from them. And I can sit there, ask questions, and try to help guide them.
Hold their hand. All right, let's talk about the commercial property, because that's your core expertise area.
Yes.
So for the audience who don't know much about commercial property, can you talk about the fundamentals of property, those 2 or 3 pillars based on which commercial property is evaluated and so forth?
Yeah, well, look, at its essence, and I'll say this to our team, commercial property, the value you're creating can really be summarized in 2 things. And like I've mentioned, I like to think practically. So in practical terms, a commercial property value is summarized as, 1, when someone opens a door and they hop out of their car and they look, what do they see? That's the first part of the value proposition. They have to see, are they looking at a brand that they know, a global brand, or is it a national brand, or is it a regional brand, or is it a no brand? Where have they parked their car? Is it on a major intersection? Are there 30,000 cars a day going by? How valuable is that property? And the tenant or the tenants on that property. The second aspect of the value has got nothing to do with the aesthetics. It's, what is that stack of leases? And I literally see a stack of leases in a data room. Is it 1 lease with IKEA? Is it 1 lease with Bunnings? Is it 20 leases? And what is the strength of each of those covenants alone and together? And that strength is measured obviously in terms of the rent, how long the commitment is there for, whether there is what the annual increases are. They're probably the security position. They're the 3 or 4 big drivers in that stack of leases, because if you're going to buy that property, that's the value. That's where the value is.
So basically, to summarize, what you're saying is that what type of tenant is there, how long is the term for the lease, what are the rent review options are there.
That's right.
And the fourth one you said,
there's a security position. So if the tenant ups and leaves, what does that leave you with? Have they provided 12 months worth of rental income as a guarantee? And who is the tenant? Is it one of their shelf company subsidiaries that they can wind up, or is it the mothership?
Okay.
Is it the same tenant entity that they have for all their other stores?
You mentioned something a few times, having access to 30,000 cars. Why 30,000? Why not 20,000? Why not 50,000?
Good question. I think just with experience over the last 25, 30 years, we differentiate our sites on that metric. In Queensland, in Australia, we've got a very small population base relative to any global, standard or median. And so you're always looking for a concentration of activity. And those concentrations of activity really are in the capitals. And even then, it's within the capitals that you have to look for those areas where you have enough customers. Because in commercial property, whether it's a medical centre, whether it's a supermarket, retail, fast food, to some degree, the strength of the tenant is always determined by how easy is it to get there, how easy is it to go, how many people pass by here each day. And that, of course, can be measured in traffic.
The reason I was asking about this 30,000 car or 20 or 50,000 cars, because normally those properties will be located at a busy road, intersection or busy road. And for those properties, it is difficult to find the car parking. And from my personal experience, I've seen places who have less car parking, that can be an issue for the businesses which are running in that particular place. So what's your take? Like, because if you have, okay, let's say you have a busy road, a lot of cars are passing by. So you have a lot of exposure, like you're getting a lot of exposure. But then parking becomes an issue because more than often the parking, because it's a busy road and it's already developed and there's less car space available. So what's your take on that?
That's your easiest question, Aman, today. You'll always take a car parking headache in a development that's on a very busy road before you take a massive car park in a place where no one wants to go. Obviously, if you have no cars, then you've got a serious issue. But no, you always take the car parking issue over the development that people have to drive to get to.
Okay. A very simple question, but I really want you to click down and dumb it down as if you're talking to 70-year-old person. And tell me, like, what is the difference between an industrial, retail, and an office commercial property? What are the key differences, and what are the benefits and disadvantage of each category?
Big question. I think certainly at one level there aren't any differences. If I've got my commercial property goggles on, you're talking about a steel or concrete structure that sits on a block of land at an address, and it has a tenant or tenants, and that they're paying rent to be there because they want to be there. So to that end, retail, medical, commercial, it's all the same. Okay, it's about having commercial tenants that want to be in that location. The nuances then, or the differences, are really just about the use. So an industrial tenant wants to be in an industrial area typically. They've got a lot heavier use on the property, which really affects the property management, how the property is managed. It's a lot more, when I say more intense use, retail can be a very intense use as well. You have grease traps and whatnot. But really that's about how a property is managed then, and the profile of tenants, the requirements of tenants for a location. At one level, it's really all the same.
But would it matter, like, if the property becomes vacant for whatever reason, wouldn't it be more difficult to find a industrial tenant compared to retail or in an office setting?
No, not necessarily. So retail, office and industrial are each their own markets. They'll typically go in cycles, and they could be in different parts of the cycle in different parts of Australia. So there'll be cycles of each of those three sectors, for example, and there'll be cycles within those sectors in different parts of Australia. And so the other thing to be said about the property is, what is that commercial property? If it's a medical centre, for example, then you might have 10 tenants, or it might just be one tenant. If it's industrial, you could have 30 work stores, or it could be one tenant. So that's the second factor that you're thinking about is, what's my inbuilt insurance here? Is it just one tenant? What's the covenant? Or do I have multiple tenants? And then really it's just a question of how leasable is it in the different part of the cycle that you're sitting in if it becomes vacant. There's nothing about medical or about industrial or retail necessarily that makes it more or less leasable than the other.
Okay. A question, let's say we have a first-time investor who's looking to get into the commercial space. Let's say they have cash available or capital available anywhere from 200,000 to 500,000. From your experience, what type of opportunities they should be looking at? And part B of the question is, what are the typical mistakes a first-time investors make?
Yeah, once again, that's a very broad question. So I think whether they're investing in any one of those sectors, they should be looking for value. So the amount of capital they have will determine how they can invest. So if it's a smaller amount of capital, they might have to go with others. So they might invest through a syndicate as a retail or a wholesale investor in a syndicate, depending on how much they have. And that might be with others or through a fund. If they have sufficient means and the assets sufficiently small, then they might just be buying directly, 100% equity or with debt. So that really is predicated on the amount of money that someone has to invest. But once that's identified, which I said before is the first decision you have to make, and you are investing outside your home, then it's really just looking for value in any one of those sectors. So I talked about common sense, follow your instincts.
Yeah.
I'm currently assisting some friends to purchase an apartment in our suburb. So I'm joining with them. I'm bidding on their behalf at auctions. It's great for me because I haven't done it for a very, very long time. So I'm getting a hands-on understanding of value of a 2-bath, 2-bedroom apartment in our neighbourhood. It's frightening. But that's been really good for me to understand that. And so that same journey, which is a residential one, and all of the metrics we're applying there, not much different from commercial property. So what's the location? What's the covenant? How long is the covenant going to run for? And what other covenants are available? What other things are for sale, in that same sector? And then comparing and then understanding, what does that mean if I invest? Do I take on debt or not? What's my return profile going to be? How quickly can I pay the debt down? Those factors are similar across each of those three segments.
Quick question. Let's say you have a tenancy, you bought a place, there's a tenant there, the lease is 7 years. Is it better to pay down the whole debt using the rent which is coming? Like, let's say it's, covering your mortgage, on the property, but you have either you can have some passive income which you can take out as a dividend and use for your personal use, or you can use that to pay down debt. What's your personal take? Is it better to pay down the debt on the property, or it will take longer, maintain the mortgage payments, but take that passive income and use it for your lifestyle?
Once again, Aman, it really depends on the individual. The answer is both of those options are good depending on the circumstances. We are making both of those decisions right now in different parts of the business. So I'll give you an example. We've owned some large format retail for a long time. We had a strategic plan for that property, and that was to take the debt level from 65%, which was where we acquired it, down to 50%. That's occurred now, and we've managed to pay distributions as that's happened. And now we're at 49%. We'll keep the loan there and start paying more cash out because we don't need to keep paying down the principal, because when that cash comes out, we think we can apply it. Back to my earlier comments about the couple that might have a home paying 5.44%, say, on their home loan. When is the time, what's the opportunity for them to stop paying that down and take their savings and invest it somewhere else? Well, probably they need to be making 7-8%. So if we think we can be making 10 or 15% somewhere else, well, the loan's in a good place. It's at a less than 50% LVR. We'll take that money and we'll invest it somewhere else and make a better return.
Is there a rule of thumb in commercial property that you should be looking at a minimum return, say 7% or 10%? Is there any rule of thumb?
Not really as a hard number. Certainly in different property classes. So depending on the quality of the tenant, that's usually the thing that and which sector that tenant sits in. And then the market establishes what it thinks is a fair or a reasonable thing. So the most aggressive cap rates we're seeing at the moment in retail, for example, are with standalone drive-throughs. So the market is buying them sometimes on 3% return, which is very, very low. And they're buying that because it's a very strong lease with a long term, 10 years or longer than 10 years. And it's usually on a very good location. So the real estate's excellent because it's sitting on a major intersection. And then they know they've got good increases coming through each year. So that 3% return on their equity might become 4%, 5%, 6%. Okay, and by the time they get to the end of the lease, they've got something that's likely to renew, that's then on providing a much better return. They've paid down a little bit of debt maybe. Depending on what happens with interest rates, there might be a little bit of leveraging in there eventually. And the real estate's always really good with drive-through pads because they're usually on a major
So basically
intersection.
they're taking the average of the lease and the future expected value, and
that's right.
they're incorporating that in the decision-making process.
That's right, yeah.
No, that makes sense. Can you tell us a little bit more about syndication? How does syndication work? And maybe you can give us an example of how your company, provides that service, and so that we have an understanding or an example.
So the way syndication works is it provides an opportunity for investors to participate and have equity in assets that are bigger than what they might be able to buy themselves. And sometimes those bigger assets have a better return or a better risk profile, or both. And so that makes them attractive.
Mm-hmm.
And so very few people could own a property that has maybe IKEA as a tenant, but in a syndicate that might be perfectly achievable. So that's the attraction in syndication, and that's something that we've done from time to time. Usually, as a developer, we'll know when we've got our tenants locked in, and we'll know when our development's going to finish.
Yeah.
And we've looked to syndication there as a way for us to keep, say, half of our money in a project, manage that project, and keep connection with it, but then take half of our capital out and then apply it elsewhere. So that allows us to grow our business.
And typically, when investors come in a syndication, do they have to take a minimum percentage, or it really depends upon the project? They can be 10 investors take 100%, or they can be 20 investors take 5%, or they can be 5 who take 50%. So it's really up to the investors. Is that how it goes?
That's right. So I'll say to my children that you can start investing, with $100 in your bank account by shifting it to a better account, and then it just goes all the way up from there. The property market generally recognises retail investors, and they're sort of mums and dads that might get a prospectus and invest in a fund. That's not something that we've had too much to do with, or anything to do with, actually. Then there are wholesale investors, and they're usually people that understand property. They'll spend or invest a much larger amount in a project, maybe $500,000 and up from there. And they understand the market pretty well. They understand, and they're serial investors.
And for this syndication company, who runs the property? Is it the syndication trust, or there's a separate Startra management company? How does that typically work? Who manages then the property?
It's usually a trust, and then the trust, you'll have an asset manager, and so that sort of sits at the higher level, and that will report into the trustees, and that's understanding the property at that highest level, which is all of the revenues, the expenses, the risk profile. And then you'll have a property manager, and usually that comprises the collection of rents, facilities management on site, and so you'll have both those in a property depending on its size.
Okay. What are the typical fears or misconceptions people have about investing in a property fund or syndication?
Yeah, good question. I don't myself, and when we're setting up a fund, or my family trust is participating in one of ours, I think it's just all of the common sense line items that we talked about before. I always want to know, ultimately, how much money am I putting in? When do I get it back? How much do I make? And do I make that on the journey or just at the end? And what's the risk profile? So cost, risk, and return are the other three levers, I guess, that drive the whole commercial property market.
Yeah, fair enough. Now let's talk about the market trends and the future of property in Australia. As we see, migration numbers, especially in the last few years, they were up, and we did see a lot of rallies about that as well. But the migration numbers are up, population is increasing, there's more population growth. How do you see that? How's that shaping the demand for commercial property in Australia?
Yes, you have a number of drivers, but I think the single biggest support for property and commercial property in Australia is population growth. I don't think there's any secret about that. And so whilst we might complain that prices are going up, it's also the biggest driver, or one of the biggest in the economy. So I think, generally speaking, that means good news for the property industry and for those who are developing property, because you've got that population growth coming in and all of the needs that new population requires. I think there are pockets where maybe that's not true, and I know some parts of regional Australia are suffering because they don't necessarily enjoy that population growth, and there's a suck to the cities. And then at the other end of the spectrum, places like the Gold Coast, I think the Gold Coast had double, triple upside. It has population growth internationally. Post-COVID, I think it's been the single biggest recipient of interstate migration, that council. And so there's been a flood of Victorians and New South Wales people coming into the Gold Coast and acquiring property there. So pricing's, there's been some crazy uplift there. And so I think those things will continue to inform the market. So there'll be a macro picture that remains healthy and buoyed by immigration. And then there'll be different sub-pictures within that, depending on, more nuanced dynamics.
Okay. What do you think? How does the infrastructure development plays a role in the in creating property hotspots?
So one of our flagship development now is the development of the Albion train station surrounds, and that's a transit-oriented development. So there'll be a new train station there built by the government as part of the Cross River Rail project in the next in coming years. That's been announced now in the press. And that's a great example of how rail and new rail infrastructure, with now 2 journeys from Albion into the city, provides a perfect environment. And you'll regularly and reliably see, to any of your listeners who are investing in residential property, reliably proximity to a major supermarket and public transport are the 2 key drivers, or 2 of the top 5 key drivers of value. And so public infrastructure like rail, the Gold Coast light rail network's been very, very successful too, as a way of driving value and growth.
A lot of people, they talk about like going to regional areas or within metro cities, suburbs which are in the outskirts, where the infrastructure is getting there, but it's not fully there. A lot of people talk about, there's a good market there for the growth and there are a lot of opportunities in that section. But what you are saying is going to established area, there's already established infrastructure, there's definitely more uptake. So if a person is looking to invest, should they look at those areas where they're going to be more infrastructure down the road, where they can get more benefits in the long term, or should they stick with the already established areas?
Look, as a developer, no secret, we've been focused more on brownfield development than greenfield. I think the carbon cost with broadacre resi is something that always needs to be considered. Our cities are already by area very large, and if you look globally, Australian cities for their population are very, very large. So I think there are many, many brownfield opportunities in Brisbane to be coming in and looking at infill development, and that of course drives public transport usage up. It's a lot more efficient. You've got a lot lower carbon footprint person for person living in cities and in brownfield sites, particularly those that are already serviced by public infrastructure, because then you're getting improvements and you've got the business case there to support public infrastructure improvements. So we're definitely, as a business, very supportive of that. Insofar as the regions are concerned, it's a different equation, but one that, having come from the regions myself, we remain a big supporter of the regions. And it's a question of, horses for courses in terms of how development occurs there. A lot of it is about amenity, but always still at a different level, it's still about density, because with density you get activity and you get efficiencies. And good design typically solves density so that you can have these great spaces that are active, that are kept clean, that are safe, where you have a multiplicity of different uses and you create a great, urban environment.
Fair enough. So Ben, as we see in the last 1 year, there's so much talk about AI. The technology is changing rapidly. There's so many new, technologies coming in. Everything has a AI integration. So is there any particular technology or AI which is coming in the property market, which we need to keep an eye out, or they're improving the market because of the use?
Yeah, I'm a little conscious of my age, being 50, and seeing it coming back home with my children, where they're being encouraged at schools to use AI, which, of course, back in my day, viewed as almost as plagiarism. So I've been a little bit slow to get there, but I'm now using AI on a weekly basis myself, and I'm just finding those little places where it works for me. It might be the creation of a report, it might be challenging something that it's a way that I've been using it. I've been told something and I want to actually do my own research and understand something for myself. Look, undoubtedly, it'll find ways for application in property. I've actually got a meeting next week with a young entrepreneur from India who's wanting to talk to me about AI in property and some solutions that he's been developing. So I'll wait to see what he's got to say. And yeah, very interested, but I think undoubtedly where, probably too early for me to say, but it will find a way, and I'm quite excited by the opportunities there. Certainly where I'm using AI now, it's been very, very helpful. The speed is breathtaking. As I understand it, and as I'm working with it, it already sits comfortably with, I guess, my more mature or older fashioned views, which is a lot of the value of what you get out is very much premised on the value that you put in. And so that's certainly been part of my AI journey thus far.
No, fair enough. Now, I'm very excited to keep an eye out because every market has been, interrupted by AI, and I can't wait to see what AI role going to play in property market.
Yes.
So let's keep our eyes out and let's see what happens.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming in, Ben, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yes.
It was a nice flow. There are a
Yeah.
lot of topics, a lot of areas which we covered.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we could have gone deep in some areas, but we'll keep it for next time.
Yes, yeah,
But
absolutely.
I really appreciate you coming in, and
Yeah.
thank you. Thanks
No
for your time.
worries. No, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So that was the conversation with Ben. I really enjoyed this chat. We had a nice flow and we spoke about different topics, different areas, and I got a good broad understanding of the commercial property space. There are a lot of topics where we could have dived deep into it, and perhaps at some later stage we will do a round 2 interview as well. But for today, I think we got a really good understanding of the commercial property in Australia, and I hope you liked it. Lastly, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. If it's add value in life, spread the word. Thank you. Till next time, take care.